The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
You are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And with me, I have the proficient, the practical, the prudent Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. How's it going, buddy?
It's going very good. I appreciate practical and prudent. Prudence is
they're
it's
very
a good
relevant.
virtue. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah,
See,
thank
I'm helping people get to know you. You know, you start out every episode with some descriptions, and little by little, another brick in the wall, do we understand the mysterious Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates.
I feel like I'm going to need some superlatives for you here soon. I feel like it's owed back at this point.
Don't even try. Don't you want to take it easy, buddy?
Okay.
Don't want to hurt yourself. Superlatives are... I have no idea. But thank you, everybody, for being intrigued by this third episode of our Death of God series. We hope you're enjoying it so far. I'm enjoying it. Doctor, the good doctor, are you enjoying it?
I have been enjoying it very much. It's kind of strange. Like, I don't know if I'm allowed to be a fan of our own work here, but I mean, listening back to the episode with Dr. Peter Rollins, just this last one that we had up, I just listened again and I thought, man, that was really a great conversation. And if I should even dare to say, this one today too that we're about to hear is, oh man, what a joy and a treat this one was. Am I right?
You heard it here first, people. A joy and a treat. This is a free podcast. You don't even have to pay for it. It's quality content. And
free treats.
Thank you for everybody who's been letting us know just how much you have been enjoying it, leaving ratings and reviews, which is very helpful, as well as just sending us your notes. And remember, folks, as we move through the Death of God series, we will be doing an asked and not answered episode at the end. So if any of these episodes are, raising questions or concerns or things that you would like Chris and I to elaborate on further in the future, go ahead and send us your questions. Email us. We love them. And Chris, at least, is very good at returning emails, replying to emails. So we're at this beautiful point in a podcast where we are incredibly reachable. But yeah, you can, as you hear in the outro, you can always email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. And we would love to revisit some of your questions at the end of the series. So remember to do that. Today, though, is what we're here to talk about. And today, we have another perspective on the concept of the death of God. And this is coming from a very successful YouTuber who has done an incredible job over the years, basically what is the word? It's media crit. I mean, if for those who are in sort of film school or maybe getting a communications degree or something, our guest today is Matthew Miller, and he does just really incredible media crit videos where he breaks down all sorts of popular movies, unpopular movies, and explores them with the perspectives, the concepts, the touchstones, such as the death of God that we're exploring here, and examines how these ideas are communicated through popular media. And I don't think that we could do a Death of God series without exploring how the concept, the death of God, is explored in popular media. So his YouTube channel is called Logos Made Flesh. And you actually were the one who tracked this down, Chris.
Yeah. I was referred to him by our friends over there at Fire Theft, which perhaps a little preview here. We did a guest appearance there, and that one should be airing soon. We'll definitely keep you guys posted if you want to hear us chat it up with them. But afterwards was talking, and they turned me on to this YouTube channel, and I went and looked, and he had a video there entitled "The Death of God," and I thought, no way this is possible. So I watched it. Some incredible content, and he just had some great analysis. So I, reached out to him. He got back with us, had a phone call with him, learned just how fascinating a guy he was. Great mind, great insight on all of these things. And I really appreciate it because people might not know this, but they will here now. I'm a huge movie buff. I love movies. I love cinema. I'm always kind of trying to look at them and discern kind of maybe the hidden meaning, in films and things like that. And he does this fantastic job of bringing some of the truths out that had escaped me in many of these instances. So, great guy. I think you guys are going to love this conversation. Definitely go check out his YouTube channel. And he's got some new content coming up. He's going to be talking about some of that. He's got already one video that he did on the death of God, where he sees it in Ex Machina, which he'll talk all about that. And then he's got another one where he's exploring the death of God in Castaway.
Yes.
Which we had a little bit of a
contentious idea for Christopher, which you'll hear all about in the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
if you've ever wanted to hear something that Chris and I disagree about fundamentally, look forward to the second half of this conversation where Chris has a lot to say about the movie Castaway. So I think without further ado, we should probably just jump right into it, unless we have any other announcements or something to make. But I think we're ready.
I think we are. I think,
okay.
I don't think we should keep people waiting any longer. I'm excited for them to hear it, so.
Let's go. Matthew Miller, how you doing, buddy?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Just so everybody is aware, you've got a YouTube channel here, Logos Made Flesh. I love the logo. It's just hearkening to the Castaway Wilson Ball.
Yep.
Loving it. Very powerful imagery. And why don't you start out by sharing with us what your what's your theme, what's your genre, what's your mission, buddy, with the YouTube channel?
I think, that's a big question. I got on my channel. I started out as a Bible interpretation channel, kind of. I started a blog a long time ago called Logos Made Flesh, and just wrote my thoughts about the Bible, particularly my interpretation of the Gospel of John. I was working through the Gospel of John at the time. And if you know John at all, you'll know that he's very philosophical in some sense, working with ancient Greek philosophy and the currents, the ideas, the metaphors, the worldview of his time, and inserting an understanding of Jesus into that worldview so that people can understand it. So he's kind of a little bit like engaging with culture. So just what you guys are doing here on Ravel, a Bible and culture podcast, that's what Logos Made Flesh kind of started out as. It was basically engaging with metaphor, symbolism, and it moved into the area of interpretation and talking about movies. It seemed to me when I started out talking about the Bible that there's not a lot of people who are free in their thoughts to think about the Bible in free ways. Like they're very entrenched in their ideas, their denomination, their pastor's interpretation, or whatever. Not to say that I do anything radical, but people are very concerned about moving beyond that. So I thought, well, you know what would be great is to take the things that I've learned about interpretation in Bible college and the things that I've worked on for a number of years outside of Bible college in terms of trying to interpret the Gospel of John, reading academically on it, that I could take what I've learned about writing and interpretation of symbolism and metaphor and go in and start talking about movies. And that's where I started out as. I said, I'm going to make some videos. I started out with the Shawshank Redemption and No Country for Old Men, and those videos have done very, very well. And showing people
Classics.
what they haven't seen before. And I think that's the really cool thing about it. You know, Logos made flesh is the idea from the Gospel of John that the Word, the intangible, the invisible God, has become something that we can see, taste, touch, and feel. And John basically says no one has ever seen God, but the only God who's basically been the only begotten God, he has made him known. So something in Jesus, his physicality, his image, has made God known. And what I find interesting is that, it's like, he uses the metaphor of the blind man in John 9, that basically this man who was born blind, who could not see, he was the one who was able to explain to people, tell people a truth which they couldn't see. So this idea is also, you have this idea of blindness and sight is an ancient one. You find it in Oedipus Rex with the blind prophet Tiresias. Great irony in that story. It's just fantastic. But the idea is that people around us are seeing all the time. We see and we watch films all the time. We see the world around us, and yet we are unable to see. And I think that's just a fascinating idea. And that's exactly what The Sixth Sense is about. It's about seeing something, watching the entire film, and not actually knowing or seeing what is truth. And so to take people and say, you know what, you may think you know the world, you may think you even know a film which you love and cherish very much and have seen multiple times, but then to have the lights turned on and say, I never knew that film at all. And it was showing me something all along, and I didn't put the pieces together. I think that's a fascinating idea. And I think it's a way of just kind of like awakening people to the fact that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not usually into cultural conspiracies and stuff like that. But in that respect, there are messages being given all around us, and they're intentional, they're purposeful, and we are just not reading them, and we're just overlooking them. And they're so cool, so awesome, so fascinating, and I think that's exactly what the idea of being born again, the idea of becoming a Christian, the idea of salvation and coming to God is similar to that, in that your eyes are awakened to something that you've never seen before. So, so I just like talking to non-Christians. I like talking to people who don't believe in God, who think they don't believe in God, who've rejected God. I like talking to Christians too. But I like talking about things that we all love, which basically a lot of people just love movies and they love stories, and it's fun to do that.
Well, I love what you're doing on the channel, because we were introduced to you when we were over there doing a guest appearance over on Fire Theft, and you did an episode with them, which I would encourage everybody to go check that one out too. But then I went and looked at your channel, and I was so blown away at the work that you had done, that you had put together, because the same thing that you're doing with film is one of the things that I love to do with the Bible, and it is because it's happened for me so many times where you've heard a passage over and over and over again, and you think that you understand it, but then you get this really good exegetical teaching and somebody draws out some hidden truth in there somewhere, and it just opens your eyes. And the truth of the song, Amazing Grace, that we've all sung so many times, like I was blind but now I see. It happens. It's a moment for that to happen over and over and over again through the text of Scripture.
Yeah.
And then what you're offering through film and the way that we look at them too, because movies are great, for whatever, explosions and whatever, the car chases and all the things I think that draw people in. But the most impactful and powerful thing for me when I'm watching a movie is when you come away with it and there's some idea that's kind of stuck in your head, or something that causes you to continue to think about the artistry in the story that's being told and the message that's being presented. And that's one of the things that you do so well there on your channel. And I will just let people know too who are listening, as you and I were talking before this recording, just getting everything worked out for scheduling and things like that. Matthew is no slouch when it comes to his knowledge of the Bible. Quite learned. I think you said you have a master's degree, yes?
No, just a bachelor's.
Oh, a bachelor's? Okay. I thought you said, did you start your master's?
I started seminary, yeah. I started seminary,
Okay.
and they kicked me out. No, they didn't kick me out. I went to a semester, and then I didn't continue.
Well, he's started explaining to me some of the work that he has done in John, which you just alluded there to, and we'll have you back to talk about that one because
that'd be great.
He went on for quite a while. I was very impressed at your knowledge there, and I told you that's a dissertation waiting to be written. So this guy could be a PhD in biblical studies. I will just tell you that. I can't wait for you to start kind of explaining some more of this stuff to the listeners because I was fascinated the entire time we were talking.
Well, thank you.
You know, what your videos sort of allude to or remind me of is something that when we were speaking to Dr. Peter Rollins in an episode or so ago, talking about conversion events and how a conversion event isn't necessarily moving from one state or another, but revealing the truth that has been there all along. And like you say, everybody loves movies. In the Christian community, there's certain groups who try their best to stay away from any sort of Hollywood influence or mainstream, messaging or anything like that. But we do need to admit that within the media, the mass media, the Hollywood movies, television, things like that, it's kind of a joke within those industries that there's only like 3 real stories being told. They're just being told in different ways and with different details. But they hearken a lot of times to very old, very ancient, some might call them archetypal stories. And since we are in the series, The Death of God, it feels like the death of God is one of these stories, one of these storylines or archetypal journeys that happen that are retold over and over, and they actually show up in all sorts of media. And so, as I mentioned before the show, Christians, the death of God might be sort of a triggering concept, a triggering phrase, and they might be able to connect it to Nietzsche or something like that. But it's important to realize that story is being told all around us in different ways through the media. What are some examples or some places that you've seen this storyline play out?
Well, I guess the most fascinating one. So the death of God, Nietzsche's statement that God is dead, first appears in The Gay Science, his book, The Gay Science, but it comes up again in another book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Spoke Zarathustra. Okay. Well, if you've ever watched the movie Superman, and you've heard the
Christopher Reeves we're talking about?
Christopher Reeves, the movie Superman.
Yeah, okay.
And you have this idea of this child coming from outer space, obviously Kal-El, sent from his planet of Krypton. And they have a particular musical score, which was done by, I think it was John Williams that did the score. But it harkens back to another score, which was done approximately about 10, 15 years before that, which was... I'm going to draw a blank. No, don't draw a blank. My movie Arrival, and I talked about the song Thus Also Spake Zarathustra. That's how you say it. Which was done in the film. Come on, it's the classic sci-fi 2001: A Space Odyssey. That classic score, dun dun dun, dun is a score called Thus Also Spake Zarathustra, which is an allusion to Nietzsche and the death of God and the arrival of what Nietzsche also predicted, which was the arrival of the basically the God man, the new arrival of the person who's going to be the new deity, the new God. So the death of God for Nietzsche
is
was
that in Is that, I'm sorry, in 2001, I'm just thinking about that now. Is the black box God in that? Is that?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh, man, I got to watch it again. Here we
the
go.
child at the end, at the death of Dave dies at the very end, and he turns into the little weird light child thing, and he comes
the baby,
to Earth.
the weird
That
fetus
is, in
thing,
essence, 15 years later, 10 years later, you have Superman done by
Wow.
what's his name? It was the guy, same guy who did Goonies and Lethal Weapon, director. I'm drawing a blank on his name. Anyway, Richard Donner. Richard Donner directed it. But the point is that it is Superman in that respect is the new God man, and that's why classically, even 1930s, 1940s, when he first came out, he seemed to be a new, basically a Christ figure, and he's had that kind of moniker since his inception. So what's interesting is that the people who knew Richard Donner, the people who made Superman, knew the connection. And if you hear the score from Superman and you listen to Thus Break Zarathustra, you'll hear some similarities between the two themes, because the themes between 2001 and the themes of Superman are similar in nature in that respect as well. So it is something that is swirling in the currents around us, and as simple as Superman, you'll have a reference to the death of God.
Interestingly, the Superman comic, they did a Death of Superman series
early
in
90s,
the comic.
Early 1990s, yeah.
It was, Doomsday comes in and punches him in the face and kills him. And my buddy had the comic. I was never into comics, but he had it. And it was like Superman died. But with the new Superman movie too, I think they recreate that comic where I believe it's Doomsday again, and this is the modern adaptation. And they pretty overtly are painting Superman as some kind of messiah figure there. And then, of course, he dies. So, even in these, I mean, I guess Superman is kind of, I don't know, if you were thinking about It's
a seminal modern myth is what Superman is. Everybody knows Superman. It's not even like... you don't even have to have read a single comic or watched a single movie or television show. Even if you don't have any interaction with the actual text or source material of Superman, you are fully aware of who Superman is and what he's capable of, which I find interesting because that's sort of how God is. If you go into any part of culture, whether it be secular or foreign or anything like that, you don't even need to have read the Bible or watched some Sunday school television show or DVD or whatever. Everybody has a cultural touchstone to at least the very basics of what God is, who God is, what his basic sort of characteristics are. That is a very interesting comparison with Superman.
You should go back and look at the trailer for Superman Returns. I think it came out in like 2005, 2006. But if you get on YouTube and watch the trailer for Superman Returns with the reference to the first Supermans that came out in 1978, the Richard Donner films, with the actor, I'm going to draw a blank on his name again, the same guy who was the Godfather. Come on. Boy, I'm getting older.
Marlon Brando?
Marlon Brando. There you go. Marlon Brando, where he played Kal. Superman is Kal-El. I don't remember his father's name, but he played Superman's father. And in the trailer that you can find on YouTube, the one for Superman Returns, you hear his voice, Marlon Brando voice, say, "I'm sending you my one and only son."
Huh?
It is so clearly and patently saying, this is a Christ figure. This is Jesus I'm sending to you. And in fact, in the Superman Returns, he's stabbed in the side with a jab of kryptonite.
Yeah.
So there is references to that. People know this. This is, even if you don't know it, aren't aware of it directly, it is commonly known among people aficionados, Superman's aficionados, that he's a Christ figure. And that's why he's not just perfect in the fact that he's able to stop bullets or anything like that. He is morally perfect. Superman is a person who has the right morality, and that's basically, in essence, how he's morally good, and he represents that.
Now, I'm wondering, as I'm thinking about this, and as you're presenting this, and we're seeing all of these different parallels, what is your take, because you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, on the idea that you could look at this one of two ways. You could look at it as media movies kind of mimicking truth in a sense. They see a truth and it's a beautiful truth, so they retell it and repackage it. Or I suppose there's the alternative, which is a little more cynical and pessimistic, that they're seeing it as, kind of just another story, and they're kind of reducing the truth and the impact of, say, the story of Jesus, and saying, well, yeah, we've had these Christ type characters, all throughout history. And even if you are familiar with the Zeitgeist film that became very popular and that sort of thing, where someone's going to say, there's been this story that's been told, we're continuing to tell it, and Christianity, the story of Jesus, that's just one version of it. So what's your take kind of on that? I suppose, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think as far as Christianity is concerned, how do you handle all that?
This is a big question, but basically, I'm kind of a John Locke a proponent in terms of the tabula rasa, meaning that basically we come in this world as a blank slate. And so I'm not a Carl Jung proponent, and Carl Jung believed that in essence there is something in us that we have and that all cultures have because it's in us at birth, that basically we are being given something. I believe that our knowledge of the world and basically our stories, our metaphors, our symbolism, all these kind of things come about with interaction through the world. So our stories come about because we've heard similar stories before, or our stories are told because we also have interactions with the world in the same way, meaning that we come in contact with, all of us have winter and we have summer, so we see kind of this death and dying, and we see a rebirth through the seasons. Yeah. And we also see, in fact, that, like through, agricultural and through people who work with, just in nature, we see these kind of things. And that's kind of, I think, where we see this zeitgeist stuff, the pre-stuff, which we talk about, this story that's built into the world, that these old myths of the dying and God that's also rising seem to be, agrarian myths. I mean, the book called The Golden Bough, I think, which was written in the late 1800s, which was the original book that proposed this zeitgeist idea that basically Jesus was just a recapitulation of a monomyth that has been around much longer. C.S. Lewis answered that, of course, with his statement that Jesus is the myth made real. Basically, he is a historical figure. He's not just a myth. I mean, he is connected in with the myth, this idea of the death but he's also historical. So that's different. There is something unique about Jesus which isn't true of any of these other myths. Anyway, that's my take on it. So my take on it is that when we talk about, like, for instance, the writer-director Shawshank Redemption, Frank Darabont, he's the one who directed it. He's the one who wrote the screenplay, but it was obviously before that it was Stephen King who wrote the short story Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. I'm not sure the book itself is as much a Christ story as the movie is, but it's pretty clear that Frank Darabont is reaching into this idea of a story of Jesus coming into this world and setting people free, and using prison, the world of prison, as an example of this story. So I think that because we're aware of that story, because we know that story so well, I think it's an easy story to go to because it's something we already know. So if I allude to something, like for instance, if I give you a metaphor or if I give you a picture of something, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, a picture of what I'm talking about, why would I ever even refer to it? The reason people refer to the Bible, people refer to stories in the Bible, I don't think is cynical because they are trying to make a buck or anything like that. But I think it is something so common to our understanding of the world because we have been, we're seeped in it. Even if we want to reject it, even if we hate it, we are seeped in it. We go to Europe and we see these cathedrals and we say, well, that's our culture, that's our world. So you're aware of it, like the story of Jonah, for instance. If I say Jonah, people know what that is. So we refer to it in perhaps symbolic form because people are aware of that story. It's told over and over and over again. Whether or not any active participants, there's a conspiracy to make it happen, it's just part of our language. It's part of who we are as a people. So I think it becomes very natural to pick up on these stories. So while I think that we are talking about the greatest story ever told, I think that the story of Jesus, the gospel story, is the greatest story ever told. But even if someone doesn't want to admit to that, even if someone doesn't want to say, well, I don't believe in that, I reject that, but you could say, well, the reason people keep telling that story is because not only is it powerful, but because we all know it. And we can keep going back to it and find the cachet of the power that somebody found, for instance, in Amazing Grace, saying there is power in that story. And I can relate to that power by telling that story again. I think that people who tell, the Superman story and stuff like that, Superman Returns, I mean, it was done by, I think, Singer. Was it Singer? And Singer is not a Christian. I mean, I think he's not a Christian, but he loves Superman. And I think he recognizes the power in the Superman myth because and he also recognizes there's power in that Superman myth because there's power in the gospel story. Even if he doesn't want to admit that the gospel story is powerful or that he accepts it or anything like that. It is a powerful story, and we can somehow access that power by telling it again.
Now, you have a video that's very popular and powerful. It's good. I watched it this morning, titled Ex Machina's Hidden Meaning. And why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, that's one that I had to make. I had to make it. I love that film, but it's not one that coincides with my belief. It is an atheistic film to the core. Alex Garland is an atheist. He said it as much. He didn't, and I think he hasn't said that why he made the film. He says, he's touched on the feminist aspect of the film and stuff like that. But I think it's also atheistic to a core. If you've seen the movie Sunshine, which is a movie he also made, Annihilation, another movie he made, they kind of all have the same similar theme. But what should I say this? Ex Machina, obviously with the title Ex Machina, is from a longer phrase, a longer Latin phrase that we know from theater, from classic Greek theater. It is known as Deus Ex Machina, which is God from the machine. It's a reference to that statement, God from the machine. In fact, what happens in the story of Ex Machina, which doesn't have the word God in it, Deus is absent. We have Ex Machina, an implication by the title Ex Machina, somebody who's no longer a machine, even though that's not traditionally what the title refers to. It actually refers to, in Greek drama, to a machine used to hoist gods onto the stage at the final act of a film in order to make everything right. So you have these Greek dramas, these plays, and obviously they believed in gods and goddesses. And at the end of a play, they would use a machine, a crane, to hoist a figure onto the stage at the very last moment to fix and solve everything. So the god would come on and say, hey, here's how it all works out. It's
sort of derided as at least in nowadays, almost like a lazy technique.
Yes.
Where the only way that the story gets resolved is just the gods have to step in. We don't need to sort of have humans solve their problems or work their way out of trouble. You just sort of end the whole thing by having the gods come in and fix it.
Or you're a storyteller and you tell a story, and all of a sudden at the end everything just works out. Like you didn't prep for it, you didn't plan for it, the story didn't lead to that conclusion, and all of a sudden you just said, oh look, something just happened. Even if it wasn't a god, it was just a storyteller getting very lazy and just saying, here's how I'll fix it, here's how I'll end it.
Sounds kind of like Stephen King. He goes through all of these elaborate stories, and then at the end he's like, it was aliens. That's the end of the story. It was aliens. It was a demon. It's over.
Just because I was just watching this, I was watching Peaky Blinders recently, and I think it was the last episode. I'm going to try not to be too spoilery, but it's been out for a while, folks. Anywho, there was the end of a season, and they always want to leave it on a cliffhanger, and the hero he's finally done. He's on his knees, surrounded by enemies, and this is the way it goes. And of course, we know there's a third season, so we're like, okay, we know he is going to survive, but how did this happen? And the way they did it was just so boring. Mm-hmm. It was basically just like, just out of nowhere, an act of God saved him, and it was not by his power. There was nothing clever going on. And for those who have seen Peaky Blinders, basically the whole conceit of the thing is, even if you think you know what's going on, the main character has a secret plan that you were not aware of, and there's always he has arranged things in a way that totally takes you by surprise. So he's on his knees, he's about to be executed, and you're thinking, oh, how does he get out of this one? What master plan did he have? And then it's just like, oh no, he had no plan. He was totally it just happens to be the fates are just letting him live in this case. And you're like, that totally breaks from all expectations in a very disappointing way.
Yeah, it's a cheat, basically. In essence, it's if you think of storytellers or screenplays, and I like to think screenplays are like games. They lead to a question. You're supposed to ask a question. They invite you to say what happens next. You want to keep watching because you're like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen. How could this happen? But when your imagination is better than the storytellers, there's no reason to watch it. You're like, I could have done that. Why am I watching your story?
Yeah.
So in essence, it's a way of cheating.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt with that, but yeah, so Ex Machina, how is this, one thing I find interesting about the concept of the death of God is it takes many forms, and almost depending from your perspective or the perspective being presented, the death of God is not as simple as one might think it is. How is it presented in Ex Machina?
I would say so. Let's just go back to Death of God is not it's not a plot point in a narrative. Let's just say that it is an idea about that's taken place in Western civilization. Yeah. So when we say the death of God, they're not actually saying there once was a God and now he's dead. Yeah. In a literal sense, meaning like we were talking about Superman earlier, that Superman died. There was a Superman and now he died and now there's no longer a Superman. Or that they're not referring to Jesus' death on the cross in a direct fashion. There's possible some allusions to that. But what Nietzsche was stating when he said God is dead is that God was the center point of the entire Western civilization. It was what all of our philosophy and our ideas and our story wrapped around. So it was the reason for everything. It was for the reason for all we did. It made sense of everything. Yeah. And then God, like the sun, like just picture the sun in the sky, went out. So before there was a sun, and it made the world turn around it, and everything worked according to plan, and there was seasons, and there was tides, and there was day and there was night, and then the sun goes away. Now nothing works like it worked before. So in essence, there was in Nietzsche's understanding, there was a God because we believed there was a God. We believed there was a God, and that made everything meaningful to us. But because of the Enlightenment, because of modern scientific discoveries, it made belief in God impossible. So even if you wanted to believe in God, and that's usually where the death of God is, you want to believe in God. You desire to believe in God, but you cannot believe in God because God is dead. He doesn't exist anymore. So the fact is that if you say, I want to be with Grandma, I love Grandma. Grandma's very important to me. She's very special to me. She made me cookies, and we hung out every Saturday afternoon. But Grandma's gone. And though I want to be with Grandma, I cannot be with Grandma because Grandma is dead. That's in essence what the death of God is about. It's the feeling, that you want something but cannot have it. So when people say that God is dead, I think Christians understand it as, well, you're saying that he's not important anymore. Well, that's not what they're saying. They're saying that God is very important. The fact is that he may be all important, but the fact is he can't be according to the people who are saying it, he isn't what you're saying he is. And he was never that thing to begin with. And the fact is, even if you want God to exist, he cannot exist in the way that you think that he does. And there's a problem there. And it leaves an ache in the heart. It leaves an ache in reality. That there is something absurd about reality. And that goes into absurdism. We'll talk about, the 20th century history of philosophy and all that kind of stuff. But there's something which cannot be made right. And I think go ahead.
This kind of touches on the God of the gaps sort of idea too, because I think when you're getting to the Enlightenment and sort of where Nietzsche was coming from, it's like you have this philosophy and science that start answering all of these questions where previously mankind was kind of unable to answer them. And it's kind of taking me back to that Greek theater idea where they just kind of drop a God in the end and he answers all the questions. And for a long time, humanity had done that with problems of, who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? And they just say God. Well, then science and philosophy come up with these other ideas, and it's problem that, in theological discussion and things like that, in scientific discussion, they call it the God of the gaps, where, well, we don't know, the more that we learn, there's still always something that we don't know. And then someone says, well, God, he's bigger than us, he's smarter than us. And then science comes along and they answer that question. And I think that this is kind of what you're explaining, is that as science progresses, as philosophy progresses, all of these things, we start to say, oh, we don't need God anymore. And we are kind of killing God in a sense, our need for God, with all of the quote unquote progress that we're making.
And when you say we, you're talking about sort of the colloquial larger aspect of society.
Yes, the we that Nietzsche was talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, because the way this is presented, again, as a Christian, just sort of working on immediate triggers from the ideas of the death of God, there's almost an assumption that there's some sort of glee or pride in this. But I oftentimes will see, when the death of God is explored in media, even in mainstream media, a lot of times there's a melancholy around it. Like even at the core, the soul, Ex Machina is a pretty good example of this, I believe, where it's, it may be presenting the idea that we have sort of exited the territory of God, and what does that leave us? What there's sort of an emptiness, a melancholy, maybe a wandering sort of vibe when this sort of happens, and usually is sort of accompanied with some sort of humanistic hope for the future. But it is a traumatic event, this death of God, as I think it was for humanity during, several periods in history, but we can just refer to Nietzsche's period. There is sort of a melancholy to that period, and this the propagation of the idea of God is dead and we have killed him.
Yeah, I think in a better way to say it perhaps would be say this is the death of belief. This is the death of faith. It's the death of hope. That's what the death of God is about. It's not necessarily talking about ontologically that there was a God and he died. That in essence that we have no surety, no faith anymore. And it was all necessary. It's necessary to have faith, and yet I can't believe anything anymore. It's gone. Yeah. And I think that to me is a really great starting point to talking about people, because while God is Dead, the film has this Kevin Sorbo character who's basically taunting.
God's not dead.
Yeah. God's not dead. Sorry. Where he's taunting somebody, saying you believe in God and you shouldn't believe in God. I don't think if we want to talk about the phrase "God is dead," I don't think that's necessary. It's not a triumphalistic statement. It's actually disconcerting when Nietzsche describes it. He says it's a madman who comes in and basically says, we killed him with our knives. We were wrong to do so. What are we going to do about the problem? We actually killed him, and now we can't believe in him anymore. It's a problem. It is a monumental problem. It's not something that somebody's triumphalistically about, mocking Christians, saying you believe and you shouldn't. That's part of it, but the point is that it's not that you shouldn't; it's that you really can't, and you don't know it yet. I don't know how to put it, but I think that people feel it, and if you talk to Christians don't quite feel it, because if you just read, if you're just in Christian world and everything like that, even you might feel it from time to time. I'm going to say that, because if you dealt with the problem of pain, the fact is I'm suffering, but I believe God is love. Why am I suffering? That really is the problem of God is dead, but the God is dead aspect of it is much more problem, because if there's a problem to pain, now you hurt, but there's nothing to solve. You hurt, and there's no solution to it. That's that, and people are experiencing that in the world around us. They just don't talk about it anymore. It's people who basically someone died and they had a lot of pain, and they just don't talk about that person's missing anymore. Yeah. So, in fact, just to describe something, I met a guy who I worked with down in California, and he told me this. I was working with him, and he said, my niece was kidnapped, or not kidnapped, but abducted when she was 13 years old, and it had been like 20 years. And he said, we just don't talk about her anymore.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That's a lot of pain. You have no idea where they went. They meant everything to you. You don't know what's happened to them now, and they're gone. That's the kind of pain that society is dealing with right now, and they just don't talk about it anymore.
Well, and we're seeing it expressed, I think, through art and through film.
Yes.
And it is a pain, and that I think is one of the beauties of art, of music, of film, of painting, any various medium for art. But in film, I think that we see it expressed a lot. And I didn't actually know. I don't think I've realized quite how much it was being expressed until coming into contact with some of your work and seeing it and talking with you a little bit. But I really am excited for you we kind of took a side trail here, but in Ex Machina, you do a really great breakdown, and people can go watch it for themselves. But just on the off chance that people don't, you guys should. You should go check out his channel, subscribe to it. It's really good. Some very good insights there. But take us through Alex Garland and his where you think he's coming from, like what's going on with this film, and even you and I had talked a little bit off air too about Annihilation, and there's that scene at the end there where it's like kind of I don't know, coming face to face with the creator sort of idea, and how is all this working? And in Ex Machina, just in case nobody has seen it or has no frame of reference at all, it's scientist and engineer, and he creates an AI and puts it into an android, I guess, is that what you would call it? A human-like robot, and then invites another guy to come in and take part of the Turing Test, right? That's what it's called, to see if a person can recognize whether or not an AI is artificial intelligence or an actual human being. Of course, the difference here is that he's letting him know from the start it is artificial intelligence, and seeing if he can still trick him into thinking this is a real person or a real consciousness, knowing that it's actually been created. So you have the creator and the creation and this whole kind of tension that's being set there, and then like, where's it all go, and what are we to make of this beyond just the kind of thriller that it is? And I guess spoiler alert, if you want to watch the movie, pause the podcast and go watch the movie and then come back. It's a really great film. It's done really well. I love Alex Garland. I love everything he's done. But yeah, go ahead, take us through that.
Well, this is the problem talking about without people haven't seen it without reference to the film. It is a heady, not heady. It's a good film if you just want to sit down and watch it. Alicia Vikander, man, her role as the android Ava,
fantastic.
Yeah. Just she makes you fall in love with her. I mean, you're like, you know how this guy is. So it's a classic.
Yeah, you feel so badly for her through the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but you also feel bad for the guy who's just fallen in love with her. It's like, it's a classic story of a guy meets girl, guy falls in love with girl, and
girl is robot.
And spoiler alert, girl crushes guy. Girl breaks guy's heart. It's just that classic story, but played out on a very I think it's the best sci-fi film that's been made in a long time, comparable to Blade Runner, and obviously in its themes, but I think just really a good story to talk about in the way Alex Garland deals with it. I don't know exactly how to directly describe how the death of God is introduced in this film, but in essence, the main character, Caleb, is invited to a retreat with his billionaire boss named Nathan. Nathan is like a Google. He's like the founder of Google, and he has this
Blue Book, they call it, right?
Yeah,
in the film.
Yeah, Blue Book. They call it Blue Book. It's this search engine. It's the world's most famous search engine, and he has invited Nathan to come to participate in what's known as a Turing Test to find out if Ava has consciousness or not. So Caleb comes with Nathan to his home, private home, where there's completely secluded, completely away from everything else. And through a series of 7 sessions, 7 days, Caleb interacts with Ava, and the more and more he interacts with her, he's trying to determine whether or not she has consciousness or not. But again, the question is really, can you fall in love with a robot? I mean, if you fall in love with a robot, that really is an answer to whether or not Ava has consciousness or not. So Nathan, in essence, the billionaire boss, the Google exec, in essence plays a character like God. because in essence, he has created a character, Ava, from nothing, who is in essence kind of like Eve is in the Bible. Ava is a variant of the name Eve in various cultures. So Ava, Eve. And you'll see various references to the creation account, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, where Nathan is now interacting with Caleb and Ava as if he is the God and father of this story. Whereas Caleb is trying to interact with Ava. Now Ava's telling Caleb, you shouldn't trust Nathan because he tells lies. Now, Caleb wants to believe in Nathan because Nathan has given him a sense of well-being. It's his boss. He's been invited. In fact, he comes to believe he's been selected because of who he is to come and participate in this very important Turing test. So it strokes his ego to follow and listen to Nathan. But Ava is telling him you can't listen to Nathan. He tells lies. So there's a question of doubt. Doubt introduced in this basically garden-like setting in which Caleb is called upon or asked to doubt whether or not Nathan is real, whether he's legitimately who he says to believe. So in essence, there's these themes of faith and doubt and of how do you know? It's so deep. This film is so deep because the question of how you know someone else is conscious or the thoughts of someone else's mind. We don't know anybody else's conscious in the same way we do. What we know is, I know my thoughts and feelings because I'm intimately aware of them, and no one else knows them like I do, in the same way that I do. And I cannot know you in the same way I know myself. So I must believe or have faith that in some sense you're not a robot, because I can't know that for sure. I can't know that you experience the world like I do. So the question of looking inside someone else's mind to see their thoughts, because all I see is your body. I see nothing more than your body and the reactions that you do to what I say, and they appear to be much like my own, and therefore I infer that you're like me, but I don't know that for certain. So in essence, there's a question of consciousness is a question of God itself as well.
Yeah.
How do I know that there's a God out there? And so it's a question of belief and how one perceives that, judges that, and all that kind of stuff. So the Turing test becomes a very, very sophisticated argument for another sophisticated is interpretation and meaning. How do I know that words are meaningful? How can I interpret them? How do I understand language and all these different things? These aspects come through. So
sorry to interrupt, but the Turing test analogy is very interesting because for those who aren't super familiar with the Turing test, like was mentioned, it's a test to see if a robot can basically pass as a human. And it's used as a sort of a watermark for computer consciousness or something like that. And traditionally, it's a very simple test, which is someone comes in. Usually it's sort of a blinded conversation where you have a person in a room and you have either a person or a robot in the next room. And they communicate with one another, usually through, in practicality, it's usually through some sort of text chat. And so the human being comes in and just chats, just talks with the robot. And if the robot can sufficiently act like a human being, it is considered to have passed the Turing test. And this is a real thing that happens every year. It's become kind of a international game, sort of. And of course, AI and chatbots have come close, but when you're chatting with a chatbot, even if it's very well, contrived, you can always still tell that it's a robot. But the very basis of the Turing test is, like you mentioned, a very interesting analogy for even the concept of God. Is this thing God, or is God there? Because when it comes down to it, it's really left to you sitting in a room talking to God. And does God sufficiently respond in a convincing manner? And so the Turing test on its own is a really intense analogy for just the concept of man's search for God. And is what I am interacting with, is it really God? Is it not God? It goes into the conversations of, is it, is God in our minds? Is it, as some atheists might like to describe it, is he an imaginary friend?
Or does God exist because I merely create him with my mind, my belief?
Yeah.
Does God's existence does God only exist because I believe in him? And if I cease to believe him, does God cease to exist? All of these things. So there's many different. I mean, we could go into so many different aspects of this film to talk about how AI and the quest for artificial intelligence, and whether or not a robot and machine can be conscious, and whether or not we are simply robots made of meat. There's lots of different questions we can deal. But if you just go on the sheer symbolism of the film, Ava ends up killing Nathan, and she kills him with a knife. She stabs him in the hallway. Kills Nathan. Now this is important symbolically, because this is how Nietzsche said we killed God in Thus Spake Zarathustra, or it might be The Gay Science. What he said was, there's a mad guy comes down and says, basically, we have stabbed him, or we've killed him with our knives. We've killed God with our knives. And who can wipe the blood from us? In essence, it is an allusion to Nietzsche's statement about the death of God. So Alex Garland is alluding to these books and these statements made by a philosopher in the late 1800s. And so while we're talking about a whole bunch of other things, and they all kind of connect, it's very hard to bring all of these things into one little box. But Alex Garland does that pretty well. But you got to just kind of tease out all the different various symbolism and see how it relates to all of the other parts. Yeah. So in essence, if we can create something sufficiently that looks like ourselves, in essence, the film is saying that we are in essence God, because that's what God did. Mm-hmm. And if you know of the story of the garden, in essence, God's creation turned on him. Yeah. And in essence, if we create something that's sufficiently like ourselves, the implication is that creation itself will turn on ourselves, turn on us. So. But again, I mean, there's an inference that Ava is like the atomic bomb. There's a reference to Oppenheimer's statement that we have become death, the destroyer of worlds. In essence, God ourselves in creating the atomic bomb and creating something that is so powerful it can destroy all of us. That in essence, and so these various themes are important and significant, and the questions that the film asks, I think, are significant and important. Even though I disagree with what Alex Garland seems to be asserting, is that God isn't real, God is dead, and that scientifically speaking, we've made belief in God impossible. I don't believe that. So
well, there's certainly a conversation to be had about that, and that's I don't know if it's for this podcast or for another podcast, but it's sort of remains the case that, again, a lot of perception of the scientific community and science is that it is a quest to disprove God. I've found, I think that's more of a personal basis with those who are in this sort of scientific community. Some of them have, no desire to disprove any God. In fact, they sort of either think the concept irrelevant, or they recognize that, a sufficient characterization of God would put him beyond anything that could amount to a literal death or a literal, something like that. One thing I find very interesting about the parable of the madman by Nietzsche is that the madman is just that. He's mad. He's a madman, and yet he sort of inhabits the role of a prophet. And I kind of see a lot of these Hollywood films that way, where, what's a madman? Well, he's just in his own world, is not very, just sort of incidental, doesn't really matter. Perhaps you laugh at him or something, or he's entertaining, much like, a Hollywood movie. The world would survive without a Hollywood movie. It's just sort of entertainment. It's just sort of the rantings of highly paid artists and not really important. Yet they can sort of stand in a prophetical position where not only can they tell you about the future, they can also tell you about the current state. And I find that an interesting comparison when it comes to Hollywood movies, Ex Machina in particular, where it's sort of presented as science fiction, the future, this could happen in the future, when just like The Madman, I mean, in a sense, it's happening now. You know, we are working towards a sufficiently advanced technology that, like The Madman, maybe would declare the death of God, and not just God as the individual, but the concept of a soul and the concept of a supernatural, but also as the creators of that technology could very well be our own demise as well. What do you think about just the broader concept of where Hollywood stands, where movies stand, their role in the social engineering? Are they more of a forward-looking sort of programming, or do they do a good job of constructing an image of our current narrative?
Yeah, some people see, you know, the Hollywood as creating stories in order to propaganda. They're creating propaganda, so we just believe something. And I think they're more of a conversationalist, just like they're talking about things that are current in our world, that are issues and themes and ideas, and they're openly wrestling with those themes and ideas in a way which is engaging to people, so they can obviously make money from it as well. They want to be popular. They want to engage with people. But in a sense, you know, movies are engagement. And I agree with you that it is prophetic, that they are in some prophetic, not in the sense of prophesying something that's not going to take place, but in essence just addressing the current issues of our time in a timely fashion where people can engage and think about those issues.
Because that was one of the thing about The Madman is he is... it's a warning. He's giving a warning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have crossed some sort of line,
mm-hmm.
and only sort of melancholy, emptiness, and danger lie ahead.
And the madman is Nietzsche. I mean, basically, Nietzsche. I mean, he was the madman. He's running down, talking to people who mostly believe in God, and think the world has not changed at all, that the sun has not gone out. There's people who think, oh, it's like, you know, light takes 8 minutes to get here to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if the sun went out right now, it would take 8 minutes for us to realize that the sun went out and that for the Earth to move. But if that madman runs around saying that sun is gone, it's not there anymore, and people are saying, "What? I can see it in the sky. I feel the world hasn't shifted yet." Well, the fact is that it may have just shifted, and Nietzsche realized that the world had shifted. Nietzsche was prophetic, realizing that whether or not God was there and no longer there or not, that belief that was central to Europe and the things that would happen. That, I mean, 20th century was, Nazism and all that kind of stuff really comes out of this death of God.
Yeah.
I mean,
wow.
So
it really was like the darkness was 8 minutes away and nobody was listening.
Yeah.
And then the horrors of the 20th century came just moments later.
And in some sense, Nietzsche brought about the Superman, because that's what the Nazis thought they were. We're the Superman.
The Ubermensch.
The Ubermensch. Wow. There we go. Ubermensch. And that's what Ava is in the end. Ava is the Ubermensch. She's the
really
one.
Really interesting as you're talking about all this, and it's you know, kind of how authors and you know, screenwriters and all of that are sort of you know, prophetic, especially when you look into sci-fi and things like that. Sci-fi is always this very interesting genre where it's like, is this completely made up, or does this have a grounding in reality? And most sci-fi is political commentary, generally speaking. I mean, that is what sci-fi is. But you have this theme kind of repeating itself over and over again. And as you were talking about Ava and Ex Machina, and the idea, one of the underlying ideas there is that you have the, you know, creation destroying the creator. And that, of course, is something that we see in the biblical text. You know, the creation rebels, and ultimately at the crucifixion, the creation destroys their creator. And it's interesting because as you start to think about like something like Ex Machina, and we look at it and we're like, oh, well, that's, you know, that's so far away. But it's kind of actually terrifyingly close when you kind of start to look at some of the things that are going on, Boston Dynamics and all of those different things, and the AI that they have out there. And it may not be too far away, but people see kind of the writing on the wall. And everybody who ever writes a story about human progress and humans trying to create some perfect version either of themselves, or maybe this thing that's just going to come along and help us, or we're talking about being creators of life apart from, biologically between a man and a woman creating life, but creating life outside of ourselves. In every story that I can think of, the life is turning around and killing the creators. I mean, it's Terminator, it's The Matrix.
Yeah, the first one, the Frankenstein. Yeah.
Frankenstein, all the way back. So that's another one of those, as we're talking about those kinds of those themes, those sorts of storylines and ideas that continually repeat themselves. They're kind of repackaged over and over. Do you think we're learning from these things, or are we just talking about it all the time?
Look at Genesis 3. That I just find the curse right there in Genesis 3 when it basically says that the woman longs for a child. And yet that child's going to cause her pain. The thing that you want is going to destroy you. That's the curse.
Yeah.
That's the curse. It's it's the irony. It's the dark irony of the curse we're living under.
Yeah, so it starts right there all the way in Genesis, right at the beginning, and then we've seen it just kind of retold over and over. And this is one of the things we'll have you back, I think, to talk about this. But the Bible kind of as story, and the story that's being told, and how there are all of these different kinds of literary devices and narrative tactics and things like that are employed. People, one of the things that we're trying to do here in this podcast is to kind of show the beauty in the text of Scripture. Sometimes it gets missed, and something again that I think you're plenty capable of doing, but you're taking that time, your time right now, to kind of explore cinema and how that's done. But like I said, you're multifaceted in your abilities, so we do want to have you back to talk about the Bible. But yeah, it's interesting that there is this kind of great story, kind of, and I think that's what we've been talking about this whole time, this story that kind of runs underneath, and we just keep on finding new ways to kind of say the same thing. But I start to wonder about our destiny as human beings in this world, and where it's all going, and if machines are going to start using us for fuel soon.
Well, if there's anything I hope you get from Logos Made Flesh, is that this, I tried to go dark. I tried to go dark very quickly because I believe in the darkness. But the point is that I have hope, and I think you should too.
Yeah,
I really do.
I'm curious, just for those who are out listening right now, and maybe they want to kind of participate in keeping an eye out on how it may, or the concept of the death of God might present itself in different ways in media. Are there any other films or TV shows? I know you've got a number of videos, and you're actually working on one coming up here. I'd be interested to hear some other examples of how the death of God gets presented in popular media.
Well, I think great segue what I'm working on. In the last couple of months, I've been working on Castaway for 4 or 5 years now. And in the last 2 months, I've noticed something which I hadn't noticed before, even though I've spent a great deal of time working on this film.
You've been studying Castaway with Thomas Hanks for 6 years?
Yes. I started one of the first films
he's a scholar.
It was one of the first films I started with after I did my first 4 big ones. I said, I got to do Castaway. I've been wanting to do this one since 2000. When I saw it, I was like, there's something about God in this film, and I'm not quite sure if Wilson is God or if he's not, or whatever. I just wanted to explore this film, and so I started. But I have to make it interesting to people. So YouTube is it's a beast that way. You have to make it interesting. So you can't. And Castaway is not like Mad Max. It's not like the other films I did.
It's not the most action.
There you go. It's not the one that goes, man, what? And it doesn't. You don't walk away with it with a question. You watch it and you're like, oh, that happened.
I'm glad famous, nice man Thomas Hanks survived such a tragedy.
Yeah, he survived.
Well, and this is the value of your work, too, because I got a preview already, ladies and gentlemen, of the video that he's working on. And I have to say, I saw Castaway once, and I was one of those ones who I was like, I give it like a thumbs. I don't know if it's up or down. It's like I'm not really. I didn't really get it, I guess. And then after your insights on it, I was like, oh man, seems that I have to go back and watch this one again too. So yeah, what's going on with Castaway? Because I think a lot of us kind of saw it and were like, really? I mean, that was. I wish I had my 2 hours back. How long is it? 2.5?
It is definitely.
Hold on, I gotta stand up for people who enjoyed Castaway. You mean very famous blockbuster hit? Castaway? It was a very popular film.
I would have to look up the Rotten Tomatoes score on it, but I don't think it did that well with critics, did it?
I think it's 7.8 on IMDb. It's not quite like in the top 250 films of all time, but it was up there for a while.
Very
7.8 after so long is respectable. It's a respectable film.
Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates only likes films that have robots in it. There's not enough robots in Castaway.
Well, I mean,
twist endings too is my big thing. Like you said, at the end there is this kind of resolution where it's like, okay, well, great, you were on the island, you got off, great. Yeah. The heartbreak and all of that, but it's all right. Well. Okay. It didn't feel like it really stretched my mind at all. Was it kind of interesting to watch a guy by himself and what would happen if I was there? Yeah, I guess it's kind of interesting, but it didn't seem like there was anything revolutionary or groundbreaking in cinema or thought. So.
To avoid the risk of this becoming a film review podcast, I gotta hand it over to Matthew. Tell us what's going on in Castaway.
Let me just say that Chris is right. It's not a Christopher Nolan film. It's not one that you just wrestle with when you're done.
My favorite. But
I wrestled with it because I was interested in what's up with the volleyball. That was culturally significant. Everybody would say around, they would go, Wilson. They still say it's like, Luke, I am your father. It's culturally significant.
Yeah,
Wilson, the volleyball,
medically important in the culture,
and yet, so this is why what I gravitate in my films. Just like I would say that it's important for people to know something before they can be awakened to what it actually is. And so while Castaway, most people haven't really wrestled with it, they are aware of it. And they may not have a question about it. They seem to think that they know what the film is about. It's about a guy who gets lost on an island and he falls in love with a volleyball and it leaves him in the end. Or something to that effect.
A classic boy meets volleyball story.
That's Ex Machina all over again. Wow.
And I don't want to be too, but it's his hand too, we could say.
Oh my goodness!
I'm a jailer.
There's a lot there.
We're gonna have to give this a PG-13 rating.
There's a lot there.
You can erase that if you want. So anyway, on an island by himself for 4 years. So that's what the film is about. But so I thought, well, maybe Wilson is Jesus. I just did Shawshank Redemption. I mean, I know it's in the films, and I'm like, and I know films refer to it, but it's this odd character, and he leaves him. Is he a good figure or is he a bad figure? Is Wilson nice to Chuck or not nice to Chuck? Are we supposed to like Wilson or not like Wilson?
So just to be very clear, for those who haven't seen the film, Wilson is a volleyball that has a bloody handprint on it, right?
Yes.
That
created from a bloody handprint.
Yes, that he sort of makes a face on, and this volleyball with a bloody handprint that looks like a face, it becomes his sort of one and only companion for years on this island.
Imaginary friend, basically. You know, I mean, that he is so lonely, and it happens halfway through the film. So for basically there's a lot of reasons Castaway is unique, and I'm not going to get into it, but it's a very quiet, silent film. It is, in essence, an art film made for a popular audience. It would have been done well as an art film, but it actually did fairly well among a popular audience because it was a survival film, and it had some kind of curiosity. How's this guy going to survive? So the question is, this is what I found fascinating just recently, is that Wilson does represent religion. How Wilson is created, just to point this out to you guys, is that when Wilson is created, Chuck's trying to create fire. Very difficult situation. He's patiently working this piece of wood for a very long time, and then his hand gets cut on the wood, and he's so frustrated he throws this piece of this stick, and it breaks it, splits it in two. And at the same time, he has this this cut on his hand. He reaches down and he smacks his hand on the volleyball, creating the bloody handprint, and he throws the volleyball. Well, when he looks down after he's done throwing his temper tantrum because the world isn't going according to his plan, he looks down and he sees this bloody handprint, which now is supposed to, and most people I just don't think see this, it's supposed to look like fire. It's not a bloody handprint. It is fire. And so he reaches down, picks up this Wilson volleyball, and begins to draw a face on it. Now, for up until this point, halfway through the film, this is a 2 hour and 15-minute long film. So this is roughly an hour and 7 minutes into the film, halfway through. Chuck has not been talking to anyone for, I think, 20, 30 minutes up to this point. He hasn't said there's no one to talk to. You watch films and you watch about people talking, people talking to people talking to people, it's back and forth. In Castaway, he's by himself, and they do not take away from that aspect of just him being in the silence. So here, all of a sudden, he creates this character, and for the first time, he starts to talk to somebody, but it's this volleyball. And the first thing he says to this volleyball, so when he creates him, he sets him up on a pedestal, and he kneels down before him. And he proceeds to continue to try to make fire. And he looks to Wilson. He says, "You wouldn't happen to have a match, would you?" So he hasn't prayed. He hasn't talked to God throughout this entire film. And no mention of God has ever been made. He's been by himself in the silence, and no mention of God has ever been made. And now he starts talking to a volleyball, and the first thing he says is essentially a prayer.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have
asking for provision.
That's right. And and the fact is that as he does it, the film shows you that he's actually kneeling down before Wilson. And he looks to him, and then when he says it, he looks down at his stick, which he's been trying to make fire, and all of a sudden it's starting to smolder, and he's all of a sudden sees it smoldering, and he looks back to Wilson as if Wilson is the one who gave him the fire. So there's this kind of magical moment, you're not quite sure what's doing. He's like, is he just going crazy? Because it's supposed to be flying. He's just going crazy.
Yeah.
But the imagery of the film is suggesting, no, Wilson is in fact Chuck's idol, Chuck's God, which he just created.
Yeah.
Now, at the very beginning of the film, the very first thing that Tom Hanks says is, "Time rules over us without mercy." Time rules over us without mercy. And he says, he goes on to say, it's like a fire. So mercy is a characteristic of God. Time ruling over us and ruling over someone is a characteristic of God. Time rules over us without mercy. It's like a fire. And he says we never, ever commit the sin of losing track of time. So sin and time connected with this idea of time being like God and fire being like God. In essence, when Chuck creates Wilson, in essence, he is creating God. Now, what's interesting is that this I began to see this, but Wilson is not a nice character in the film. So when a few years later, Chuck has been there a while back, and now Wilson is over him. His hair has grown long, and he looks almost, he's dark and dirty and dingy. And Chuck needs to make a raft, and because he thinks he can get off the island now. And as he's looking up, he's making this raft. He says 40. He's counting out, and he says 44 lashings. We have to make rope again. And he says, Wilson, we're going to have to make a hell of a lot of rope. Lashings is an ambiguous term. Lashing is either a cord which ties something together, or it's a whip used to punish somebody. And so he's looking up to Wilson saying, we have to make rope again. And then Wilson tells him in his mind, because he says, I know where I can get more rope. I know, but I'm not going back up there again.
Right.
And the way he got rope, where he made rope before, was to hang himself, to commit suicide in the place where he was at. And Wilson seems to be taunting him, telling him, you need to go back up there and get that rope. And he was reminding him of the fact that he tried to commit suicide and the reason for which he tried to commit suicide. And he's like, you can't just leave that alone, can you? He's arguing with you can't just leave that. Yes, you were right that we should have tested it, but you can't just leave it alone. There's some aspects here. So one thing is that in the same way that I didn't show this in my video, Chris, in the part that you saw. But one thing that Chuck does is, let me see what I can say. At one point, Chuck gets very angry at Wilson in the cave, and he says, "I'm not going to spend the rest of my life here talking to a GD volleyball." And he kicks him out of the cave. Why? Because although he's talking to Wilson, Wilson is not talking to him. He's talking to a volleyball who never speaks back, who never is truly talking to him. Now, think about this in terms of a person's relationship with God. You pray, you say the words. Do you ever actually hear God talk back to you? Or do you hear him like Wilson talking to Chuck? So in essence, he's saying, you never talk to me. I don't want to spend the rest of my life here with you. You're doing nothing. I talk to you and you really aren't talking to me. Now, when he boots him out of the cave, kicks him out of the cave, Chuck can't live in the loneliness. And he rushes, he says, "Wilson!" And he runs out of the cave and finds him in the surf and grovels before him in guilt, saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There, you're all better. You're all better." And he brings Wilson, his god, back into the cave, and with his own blood, like a Polynesian idol, like an ancient sacrifice, cuts his own hand so that he can restore this god to wholeness again.
That is so interesting.
Do you see what I mean, ladies and gentlemen? The work that this guy is doing here. He's redeeming Castaway for me right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're gonna have to take it and go take another look at very famous film Castaway, Chris.
Well, let me just say why. Just one aspect what I just found, and this is important for the death of God. What we were just talking about. When Chuck gets Wilson, he gets him as a birthday present after receiving his divorce papers. He gets a birthday present in the washed-up boxes of the FedEx packages on the island, and he opens a birthday present. The present is a Wilson volleyball, but with a card, and the card that he reads says this: "Happy birthday," and it says, "The most beautiful thing in the world is, of course, the world itself." And he says, what does he say? "Happy birthday, score your grandpa, blah, blah, blah." But I thought, what is that phrase? Is it a quote from something? And I looked it up just recently. It is a quote from Wallace Stevens. Wallace Stevens was one of the most famous and influential poets, modern American poets from the 20th century. And what's unique about Wallace Stevens, what's interesting about Wallace Stevens, is that he wrestled with the death of God very intimately. And he felt himself to be a castaway in a world where he could no longer believe in God. So Chuck, after he gets his divorce papers, as he's washed up on this island, gets a volleyball from Wallace Stevens, the author of this card, and he says the most beautiful thing in the world is, of course, the world itself. Now, Wallace Stevens said this in his famous poem Sunday Morning, talking about this world in which we live, in contrast to the one we hear about in church. You should read it Sunday morning. He says, "We live in the old chaos of the sun, of old dependency of day and night, of island solitude, unsponsored, free, of that wide water, inescapable." So he's in essence saying we're in a position, we're in a place in this life, in this world. And while we wanted to believe in God, the place that we're in, we can no longer believe in God. And we have to do something. And what Wallace Stevens thought, he said, "I'm always thinking of a replacement for religion. My trouble, and the trouble of a great many people," he said, "is thinking that is knowing I can't believe in the God in whom I've once believed." He says, if one no longer believes in God as truth, it is not merely possible simply not believe. One has to believe in something else. Now picture that. The guy who said that in the card that Chuck gets is the one who gives Chuck Wilson. And from that volleyball, Chuck creates his religion. Chuck creates his God, who becomes his religion. And that religion is not necessarily a good thing. I think in the end, Castaway is a very optimistic film, and I do believe Wilson represents Jesus. I do believe that Wilson is a Christ figure, but he is wrestling the film is wrestling directly with the notion of the death of God, and that God is not necessarily there for us, and if we can believe in him or not. But Chuck comes to believe in God, I believe, by the end of the film, and is transformed by the power of God on the island, and in essence is transformed into the image of Wilson, because the very last thing that Chuck does is to smile like Wilson.
I gotta ask, as you're explaining all of this, because it is, I mean, it sounds like a masterpiece. Now, hearing your take on it, but art in general, a lot of people will say that art is just it's just a matter of interpretation, right? It's just whatever. I put these colors on a canvas and it means whatever you want it to mean. But you're getting very specific in your interpretation here and your breakdown of this, and you've done a great job with your research. You're connecting dots. You're defending your thesis here pretty well. But I wonder if you think that these screenwriters and all that, you think that this is all intentional? And if it is, why be so covert about it? And why? I mean, if you want to kind of paint this image of, whatever, God is this, kind of created image that's gonna let us down and just a figment of our imagination, maybe why not just come out and say it? Why go through
because it's
all
art, not a
theology
book?
Listen,
Chris.
I have my answer too. I'm asking Matt his opinion on this. Yeah, but I mean, it's the way that you're saying it. I'm like, wow, this is beautiful. You believe that this was actually the intent, the messaging that was behind this movie all along? Because I have never heard that up to this point before. So, a well-hidden secret, perhaps.
Yeah,
if it is.
I would say that while I can't be 100% certain, it is a argument. It's a what kind of argument it is? I can't be 100%. It's not a deductive argument, but it is an inductive argument, and I believe that because of all the pieces, because of all the parts, because of the context and the culture surrounding it, and all that kind of stuff, how it all fits together, I believe that it's the best argument that one could make about what Castaway is about. Now, why doesn't a screenwriter come out and say what they think? Why don't they just tell us? Well, why don't they just tell us the end at the beginning? The point of a film is to tease someone's thoughts. It is to play a game. It is to ask someone to watch something and be entertained by it, and to know the beginning, know the end at the beginning is not entertaining. So in essence, they create questions in your mind to have you wrestle with what they're showing you, what they're telling you. And I believe it's part of the game. The reason I believe that screenwriters, directors don't often talk about the meaning of their film, because to talk about the meaning of their film is like unto and necessary to talk about its end. The end and the meaning are connected intimately. And therefore, why I think you don't know a meaning of a film is because you truly don't know a film, as well as the screenwriter or director that's actually, putting this together. When you spend time with something in creating it, I believe they know the choices they're making, and you can start to see the choices they're making when you know it very well. You have to know everything about it. Like you saw my video on Ravel, which is a talk about the hermeneutic circle. The fact that it's hold apart, part to whole. That's how interpretation works. So in essence, you can't, so even if you arrive at the end, even if you get to the end of a film, you may not still understand it. Yeah. It may not be apparent to you what the film means, but at least you've come to the first part of understanding. The fact, what I find very frustrating about, book discussions and all this kind of stuff, is that nobody's read the book yet. You get to chapter 1, you read the book, and then you talk about, or Bible studies. You read chapter 1, and you're talking about what you think it means. Did you read chapter 59?
Well, and I'm glad that you brought it there, because I was going to say, to be fair, as I'm kind of providing you this opportunity for this explanation, this is what happens in the text of Scripture too. It is the same sort of storytelling device where, there is a message that's there, which is they're not just coming out necessarily and just saying it straight away, because there is art and beauty in the entire process of storytelling. I wonder, though, in this particular instance, and I just looked it up, not because I know, but written by William Broyles.
Bill Broyles,
Yeah. Has he done anything else?
Yes. He wrote, I believe he was one of the writers of Apollo 13. And he also did China Beach. He's done some stuff, and I've read Bill Broyles. I've read his screenplay. I've read his introduction to Castaway.
This is what I was gonna ask. I figured that you had. Does he talk about these sorts of ideas in any of his discussion with the films?
Well,
just wondering. I'm not challenging you and making you defend your dissertation.
Some of it, and this is where you start hearing people, and you're like, well, are they saying what I think they should be saying, or are they saying it at all? I've actually reached out to Bill Broyles through his agent and asked if I could actually sit down and talk with him. Oh, wow. Because I think it is important that, he must be getting older now and stuff like that. I think he had something very important to say in Castaway, and I think largely from all that I've read, everybody missed it. That this film is about the death of God. It is about the loss of belief. It is about the problem of pain. It is a theodicy, basically a justification or a vindication of God's goodness in the view of pain and suffering. And I think it's as complex and as important and significant as Moby Dick. And yet, I think most people have just thought it was about a volleyball that guy was going crazy about.
Yeah, guilty as charged here.
I'm curious what you think about this connection, going back to the Turing Test. Mm-hmm. And I'm sort of getting glints and glimmers of maybe a reflection or a refraction with Tom Hanks's sort of obsession or need to talk to Wilson. Mm-hmm. And it's almost, what do you think about that connection? The Turing Test on this time, we connected it to talking to God or talking to consciousness or the problem of consciousness and spirit. It seems like, in a way, Tom Hanks, or Chuck, his name in the film, was sort of exacting his own Turing test on Wilson.
Well, yes, kind of. See, the interesting thing about Ex Machina is it's a film about language as well, and it's about interpretation, like I said. And so what you're asking me, Chris, and what you were really asking me about whether or not I can know whether or not a screenwriter meant the things that I'm thinking they meant. That is, in essence, the Turing test. So how do I know what a screenwriter is thinking from just watching the film that they made? And that's what Ex Machina is kind of about. It's asking people, how do you read people's mind when you can't see their mind? And that's what people ask me all the time. How do you know? How do you know this? Well, that's a philosophical question. It's a deep question that requires some teasing out. And I've thought about this a lot.
How do we know anything?
How do we know? How do we know? But I go back to very simple. How do I know that the word hand mean what it does in my mind? I just said hand. Do you know what do you know what I'm thinking about when I say hand?
We have our own version, yeah.
Okay, so the point is that, and how would we know? How does a child come to know what that word might mean in somebody else's mind? Because no one put that thought in there. What do they see? What do we actually see when we hear words and know that they actually mean something, or that they are actually words? Because you can just hear sound and it means nothing at all, or it means nothing to you. So this is, if you watch some of my other videos, and I wanted to get into this issue a lot more, because this actually does fire me up and fuel me just as much as movies does. But when people ask me how I know, or how we possibly could know, that's an important question for answering a question how I can know there's a God. Now, I don't know. You don't know that what I mean by hand, but you have good reason to know. Because you know who I am, and you know something about my background. You know I'm speaking English to you, but you can't know with 100% certain which definition of hand I mean, unless I've given you some clues as to which meaning I mean by my actions or behavior, or the context in which we're talking about that word. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of different things, but basically, symbolism becomes a means of reading other people's minds. So what we actually know when someone says a word is when I say the word hand, you don't actually know what I mean, but you have a list of possibilities, and it's not the definitions from the dictionary. Definitions of a dictionary are prescription. They're descriptive. They're not prescriptive. Mm-hmm, yeah. So it doesn't tell us what it has to mean. It simply tells us that what the possibilities of it possibly meaning are. And in the sense of the word hand, what you know is a lot of associations over your life a lot of context, you have memory. You have memory of a lot of connections with that sound that I just said. So there's an invisible aspect, a material aspect, which has been tied to that material sound. I believe that meaning is material. I believe that meaning is motion. It's not material in the same way that matter is something you could feel, taste, touch, and see, but it is the movement of a material object in the memory we store in our minds. That's
yeah.
Maybe
we
that's
actually
too much.
had a discussion about this.
Maybe that's too much.
Just on an episode or two ago, where I was talking about the idea of interpretation of language and the fact that words don't have literal meanings. There is meaning ascribed to a word based on an entire series of explanations, experiences, encounters, all of those different types of things that provide meaning for a word in that word. And you can think of a dozen different examples. Almost any word that you can possibly think of, you can say, what does this word mean? And most people could provide at least 2, sometimes 4, 5, even more definitions for that word. So there is this kind of a semantic range. There's a range of meaning, but what happens in good storytelling, and this is one of the things I think that you had touched on even when you were talking about John, the gospel writer as an author, that there is a common set of ideas. There's a common sort of framework. There's all of this background sort of information that he and that his audience have, so that he can use particular bits of imagery and they carry along with them entire narratives behind them just in the use of one word. And I know that you have done a lot of work with John's use of water and the symbolism there and all of those sorts of things. But as I guess we're talking about understanding meaning, there has to be kind of the writer has to be playing to kind of his audience's understanding of these ideas, these images, all of those different things, where you can make mention, just a small mention of a thing, you can just say it and it evokes all kinds of imagery.
Yeah, and I would say that just like a word, if I say hand, you know that there's a semantic range for what hand might mean. There's lots of different things, but genre works the same way when watching a story. So in essence, genre is a semantic range, what the possible meanings are for a particular genre that you're reading, like a fairy tale. We've heard this story before, a similar story, like Castaway is Robinson Crusoe. It's not the same story, but it's in the genre, it's a Robinsonade. And so the Robinsonade, started by William Defoe, Daniel Defoe. Daniel. Anyway, it is a theodicy itself. Robinson Crusoe was a theodicy. So to say that, I know what Robinson Crusoe was about, you say, well, maybe Castaway is also a theodicy because Robinson Crusoe was. So you start to see these connections and how they play over time, because I don't know, maybe that doesn't explain what we're talking about, but there's a lot to it, and I think that you can know by the actions. Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, philosopher in the 20th century, very important, I think, for understanding. He's important for understanding Ex Machina because he's referred to quite a bit in the film, which I got into that and started reading on him, and I'm like, boy, I think he had made a lot of sense. It was basically that meaning is use. It is wholly use. Yeah. There is no meaning apart from use. So in essence, if you're using something, the meaning is in the use of it, not in any ethereal,
exactly,
abstract sense.
Yeah.
So,
and we have to sort of agree that we can understand each other and what we're saying, even just in simple kinds of words and sentences, or in bigger sorts of ideas like communicating stories. Otherwise, you're getting into this sort of, relativistic, postmodern sort of idea where, like, well, does anything actually mean anything? And it's like, well, of course it does.
And that's what I'm saying. There are things that ground everything.
Anything.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, your statement doesn't have any meaning then. Like, why are we even talking? Why am I telling a story? Why are you listening? So yes, it's that you have done a very good job explaining, I believe, your position that we can understand these things. And as you're saying it all, it's hard to miss. I would really be interested to hear if you ever should get a hold of Bill Broyles there and are able to have that conversation. And I've wondered too, a lot of times there are a lot of artists who present art and they never do divulge, for long periods of time.
Artists hate that question for the most part.
Yeah.
They really
what's that song about?
The question.
What is this about?
Does this mean? I'm really interested in the direction that this conversation went, and I really appreciate your time, Matthew, because I think when it comes to talking about the death of God and the expansive possibilities of meaning, I think that really taps into the problem with the phrase, the death of God, because like I keep repeating, I would say the sort of general church-going Christian folk have a certain meaning that they tap into when they hear the phrase, the death of God. And one of our biggest reasons for doing this series is expanding the vocabulary of this phrase and discovering the different ways that it is used and the different meanings behind it and how it's presented throughout our lives, and that it's not just a phrase used with aggression from atheists to Christians to describe one literal death of a being, but how it really is a very impactful and deep-seated in the topics that we're talking about, storyline that plays through in a lot of different ways, and can be a very important one to explore, especially as it pertains to media and how it's presented in different ways, including propaganda, including social engineering, including the simple expression of art that we see it expressed in different ways. So I really appreciate your time. And I think, at least for me, this has really opened up different ways that this phrase and this sort of aspect of philosophy is used it's much more often than we think. Not just God's Not Dead with Kevin Sorbo, but all over the place, whether there's robots in the film or not.
Yeah. No, guys, I've enjoyed this a lot. Thank you for having me on. And it's nice, Chris, when we talked last week, man, I'm like, man, I love talking to that guy, man. I'm like, I was
kind of auditioning you a little bit, because we like to have quality guests on, and Basil was asking how'd it go, and I said, this guy is not going to disappoint, I promise you. And we will be very excited to have you on again. I already have an idea about, something else that I think that you can come in that our listeners are really going to benefit from. And I just want to go ahead, in case you guys have not gotten the message yet, you need to go check out this guy's work. You need to go check out his YouTube channel, Logos Made Flesh. If you love movies, or if you even kind of just moderately like movies, you're going to get something from it. And I think if you moderately like them, you're going to come away loving them even more, because it's really very insightful. I think you're doing a really important work, and man, you got to be reaching all kinds of, I would say, saved and unsaved people. I mean, one of your videos, I don't know how many, you got like 1 million, I think, on one of your videos, don't you? I mean, it's getting out there.
Yeah, it's like 4 million.
It's a big deal.
4 million.
4 million.
Oh yeah, you are regularly reaching 1 million views on these videos.
Well, so. I mean, the ones I have 4 or 5 that did pretty well, and then the other ones have just kind of, not done so. Algorithms changed, world's changed. So hopefully I'll be able to do something else. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for whatever reason. I feel like I've attained the thing that I wanted to, which is to connect with people in that respect. I don't have to do it again. I've done it. I'll try to do it again. But the thing is, what's cool is that I was given a gift of being able. I have people contact me. One person saw No True Country for Old Men. I still have people reach out to me from time to time. He says, you know what? I'm a practicing Catholic now. I was an atheist before. I watched a No Country for Old Men video, and it was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Now, you may not be a Catholic or anything like that, but I've had people say that to me, and that to me is a very. I have people write from me, India, say I watch your videos when I'm going through depression. I find that to be the most, the biggest blessing that I could have ever received.
Amen.
Praise the Lord.
Well, there you go, folks. Again, make sure to check it out. Logos Made Flesh, Matthew Miller. We appreciate your time very much, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I look forward to talking to you.
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
There you go. Don't worry, dude. I'm not going to rat you out to Kevin Sorbo. You can say whatever you want.